out of Sahpra, that's the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. They've approved the Section 21 application for the Pfizer BioNTech Committee vaccine. This approval is subject to conducting a post-Section 21 authorization, efficacy and safety surveillance of the vaccine in South Africa. Meanwhile, the fight against the vaccine nationalism is a present-day reminder of the struggles scientists had in the past to gain access to antiretroviral treatment. This is for people living with HIV. Now, Dr. Gail Bekker is one of the scientists who's been at the forefront, in particular, as the co-investigator when it comes to the Sisonke protocol, and that's the Johnson & Johnson implementation study that is being conducted in the country. Dr. Bekker, good evening, and thank you so much for your time.
Happy to be here, Cathy.
So before we get into what may be perhaps the more difficult part of the interview in terms of the details of this vaccine and why the pace of everything has been going slowly, let's just speak about your role when it comes to the fight against COVID-19. You have been very busy. You've published 69 peer-reviewed papers, and it's been an incredibly hectic time for you. Describe to me just working on COVID-19 versus the work that you did on HIV/AIDS, and how do the two compare?
So, Cathy, I think a lot of infectious diseases doctors, particularly in this part of the world, are people who work on either HIV or TB. You know, that is our reality, that a lot of the patients we see are infected with either HIV or TB that sort of fulfill the criteria for infectious diseases. And then, as people have seen around the world, it has largely fallen to HIV doctors to pivot to COVID. And that has been partly because we're kind of in the space of working on viruses. We, you know, are every day thinking about antiviral agents and how to manage epidemics. And in my case, we've been trialing new innovation for HIV for many years now. So we have the field sites, we have the infrastructure and the expertise. And so when COVID came along, it was just almost natural to say, well, I have to roll up my sleeves and see what I can do regarding this pandemic. And, you know, I think it's almost a natural transition. What has been disappointing on some levels has been seeing the same kind of difficulty in accessing what might be considered public good commodities. So in this case, it's a vaccine. In, you know, 2 decades ago, it was antiviral agents. So that has been a stark reality. What has been amazing has just been the pace at which COVID-19 has leapt ahead. And the fact that we even have vaccines 14 months into this epidemic is extraordinary and to be celebrated, I think.
When one looks at the numbers that we have as a country so far in terms of the vaccination implementation study, because, you know, we're not really at the place where we can say that we have a full-on rollout yet. The aspirations in particular of government seem that they're going to be dealt a severe blow, because the pace at which you are even receiving these vaccines from Johnson & Johnson has been quite slow. Explain to us, what is the bottleneck? Why is the pace as slow as it is?
So when, you know, it became apparent that we weren't able to use the 1.5 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccines, we had a hiatus. We did not have other vaccines yet coming into the country, those that were, you know, designated to be for the national rollout. And so those of us who were involved in the J&J phase 3 study, known as Ensemble, gathered ourselves, and this was led largely by Professor Linda-Gail Bekker from the South African Medical Research Council, that we would approach Johnson & Johnson together with the National Department of Health of South Africa to say, could this be a contingent plan, that we bring in research doses of vaccine into the country under the auspices of a study, namely a 3B open label study, and thereby at least access some vaccines for healthcare workers, recognizing the urgency on hand. And so with that, we literally in a day or two wrote a protocol, got that approved by Sahpra, which enables us to import these vaccines under, as I say, the auspice of a research project. So these are research doses, not commercial doses, but absolutely tried and tested. They're the same doses we used in the phase 3 study. They've had to be gathered from all around the world, which is where the clinical trials were run. And they've been brought back to Europe, relabeled, and then sent through to us here in South Africa. J&J is working very hard to do this, but the doses are coming to us in limited consignment. So we expected about 80,000 doses every 2 weeks, and that largely has been happening, although on occasion some of the consignments have been slightly bigger and some have been slightly smaller. But essentially, you know, we are moving towards the 200,000 dose mark now. And every single one of those we've been able to get into the arms of South Africans, so healthcare workers in this case. So the way we're seeing this is it's kind of the front end of the national rollout, but the national rollout itself hasn't yet kicked in. It will do so when those commercial vaccines start coming in.
Of course, the difficulty for many South Africans is that they look at the number of healthcare workers that are being vaccinated on the day-to-day. And, you know, I don't know if you know of the different apps that people are using to calculate how long it's going to take to vaccinate at least 67% of the population. And right now, those numbers look grim. They're sitting in above 15 years. So as somebody who is so actively involved and who understands the problems, realistically, what should the expectations of South Africans be about the rollout of vaccines in this country for the rest of the year? Are we even going to come close to some of the targets that government has set? And I'm not even talking about the 67% targets, but are we going to be able to vaccinate 1.5 million people, healthcare and essential workers especially, before the second quarter of the year is up?
Well, I continue to live in hope. I'm obviously doing everything I can with my research colleagues to at least make a dent in those numbers whilst we await those all-important vaccines. So there is no national vaccine rollout without vaccines, right? So the big problem in the world today is a global shortage of COVID-19 vaccines. And it's great news. I think it's terrific that we've heard that Sahpra has moved for a Section 21 approval on the Pfizer. Hopefully the Pfizer doses are on their way. That will kickstart the national rollout per se. And what I can tell you is the pace we are going at now is one constrained by the fact that we are only able to access these 500,000 research doses for the Sisonke 3B study, but also constrained by the fact that that needs to be overseen and, if you like, managed by the research team. So we can only open so many vaccine centers across the country. Now, my understanding is that once, you know, the government rollout plan kicks in, many more vaccine centers will be opened concurrently, simultaneously, and in parallel. And therefore, those numbers will be quadrupled, you know, multiply increased, to ensure that we do get a little closer to that daily target that we need. But that is all dependent on vaccines coming into the country. And that obviously is very much outside of my domain, but one that I hope the government has under control.
And Dr. Bekker, I completely understand that part of the situation is difficult for you in that, you know, from a research and scientific perspective, individuals like yourself are really doing the most that you have been able to do. And so when we talk about these constraints to vaccine supply, and this is in terms of the global supply chain, is there anything what would need to change today in order to ease the access to vaccines?
Well, the way I see it is I see two problems immediately. The one, well, potentially three problems. The one's gone away. We might have had the same trouble finding a vaccine as we have done with HIV. It's taken us 35 years. We still don't have a good candidate. The good news is that problem went away. So we have, 3, 4, 5 good candidates now that can be licensed, that do show safety and efficacy. So that's brilliant. The problem is, we need to vaccinate effectively the globe. That is a large number of people, and it means a great number of manufacturing capabilities need to be brought on hand. And my understanding is, around the world, we just don't have sufficient manufacturing capability. And Dr. Fauci, who I interviewed actually, mid-year last year, pointed this out, that his greatest fear was not that we would find a vaccine, but that we would be able to manufacture enough doses. So you could argue, what have we been doing? Have we really unpacked and made sure that there's sufficient manufacturing capability around the world? I suspect that's something you cannot do in a crisis. It's something you need to do sort of mid-pandemic so that you actually look and see if that's feasible. The second is that clearly these companies then need to share their technology with other companies so that more people can come on hand to make the products. And I've been pleased to see that Merck has stepped forward now to help out J&J, for instance. The Serum Institute is helping out J&J and AstraZeneca. So that will increase manufacturing capability. I'd love to see manufacturing capability here on this continent, but I don't know, what that would take and when that could happen.
Doctor.
And then finally, I think there is some importance to have a kind of a fairness around the dose procurement, which I think we have not seen in this pandemic, is that, there was a scramble and a bun fight for vaccines, and poorer countries have suffered as a result.
Dr. Linda-Gail Bekker, thank you so much for your time tonight and for coming onto the show and sharing your insights. We'll take